start the next session, which is fully on Project Guardian on asset and wealth management, which, as I mentioned before, it's a project that is initiated by UBS and SBI Digital Markets are participated in with the support from Chainlink and Trillion. So now, without further ado, let me introduce myself. So I'm Ben Tan. So I'm the Deputy CTO for SBI Digital Markets. And I'll let my panelists have a quick introduction of themselves. And let's begin with Sergey Nazarov, the co-founder of Chainlink.
So yeah, I'm Sergey, co-founder of Chainlink. Chainlink is a global standard for transmitting data and value into, out of, and across chains. So far, it's enabled over $16 trillion in transaction value. Now we're working with some of the best institutions like SBI and UBS, and excited to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Collin. I am a co-founder of Trillion. We are better known as a stablecoin issuing company. We have launched a US dollar and Sing dollar stablecoin. We're in the process of applying and getting regulated in Singapore under the new stablecoin framework. My background was I used to be in the crypto trading space. I was from CoinHako, and we saw there was a huge use case for stablecoins, and that was when I decided, with regulatory, convergence in terms of stablecoin regulations, it was about time to come out to do something that's well regulated in this space and facilitate, the trade transactions that we're going to talk about today. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe just as a quick introduction of the project we've done, just a recap. I know you guys probably have seen the social media and you might probably have a glimpse of it already. So as you all know by now, tokenization in Project Guardian, we already tested it, tokenization so many times over the years, right? Ever since, maybe the first Singapore FinTech Festival, which I was part of under the auspice of MAS. And tokenization itself represents the registrar of a digital asset. That one is super well known by now. So this year, we've gone really beyond pure tokenization. And then we explored using a layer 2 and add operational fund processing capabilities, right? While the fund token itself resides on the L1 Ethereum. So in a nutshell, we have put fund subscription, redemption, processing on Arbitrum, while the actual minting and burning of the fund tokens on Ethereum. Now, the objective of our time today is to share some of the thinkings around such a utility and how we think blockchain can further evolve the lifecycle processes in asset management, distribution, to improve efficiency, drive down costs, and hopefully improve the customer experience, right? So as a first volley of questions, right? So for the panelists, what do you think are the challenges today facing the asset and wealth management industry? And how do you think our solution that we developed this year in Project Guardian can actually help? So probably starting from Sergey, this is definitely something interesting for you guys because you guys supported the project with the automation, right, with CCIP.
Yeah, so I think there's really two big parts of the problem. The first big part of the problem is how to get the data working with the smart contract correctly in order for it to achieve compliance, to provide critical information to the user, to resolve various accounting issues. One good example is NAV data and putting the NAV data on chain to prove critical things about the underlying assets of the tokenized fund. The other key aspect is synchronizing what's going on with a tokenized fund back with the asset manager systems. All of those kind of roles Chainlink played in providing the data, the synchronization with existing systems, basically letting the asset manager interact with the smart contract and letting the fund admin and all of the other systems that usually make a fund work in a tokenized fund world. So that's the first set of problems. The second set of problems are really related to liquidity, the fragmentation of liquidity across many chains. In this case, the digital transfer agency smart contract was on one chain, and then the fund tokenization contract was on another chain. But there's actually even more chains beyond that, right? So even here for the digital transfer agency and the fund itself to work, you needed to connect two chains just to get the fund structure and the transfer agency structure operating in an efficient, correct way. Just to get the contract working, you needed to connect those two chains. But then let's say you want to accept payment or usership or subscriptions from many other wallets on many other chains. Now you need to connect to hundreds of other chains because the purchasing power is there. right? The purchasing power of the user base that you want is not in one chain, it's across hundreds of chains. So you have the data problem and the ability to make the contracts compatible with the existing system. And then after you successfully launch them, you have the cross-chain connectivity problem. And then you extend that to solve various liquidity issues, right? Like all the users are on various chains. How do you get them to use your financial on the chain where it is live?
So a little bit about shilling for SBI digital markets, because it's very interesting that Sergey actually brought out the two problems it's facing, right? So one of them is really the automation, right? To make all these things seamless, right? As you guys know, if there's manual processes, there's always this problem like you can make mistakes in the transition from one process to the other. So if everything is built into the code and automated, and right now with CCIP, you can actually do cross-chain, it becomes much more fluid, all right? And chances of mistakes is reduced. Now, the shilling part that I just mentioned is that SBI DM, we are actually pushing for the global buy-side network, which is about liquidity. That's what we are trying to do. We are trying to solve the liquidity problem by bridging buy-side, sell-side across multiple sellers and buyers, okay? And for the purpose, I mean, one of the, if you guys have actually read, I don't know how many people have read the MAS white paper on fund tokenization, which came out like a couple of days back, right? Right, if you read it, I think one glaring thing that came out and popped out is the ecosystem. Eventually, you need the entire life cycle end-to-end to work together, and that's the ecosystem. And one glaring thing is payments. And that's where we have like Collin, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the payments, right?
Yeah, so I think in the payment side, you know, for us participating in this project, there's a glaring issue when you tokenize a digital asset, which is how do we settle and how do we take delivery of that digital asset, whereas your traditional fiat asset actually lacks the settlement time in which title to digital assets can actually transfer. So that's where stablecoins come in, and that's where Trillion comes in. So in this whole project, we were the lubricant, I would say, that solved the delivery versus payment issue. We were able to settle atomically, take delivery of the money market fund tokenized assets. And going one step further, you know, it provides an insight as to how we could improve liquidity across, you know, what SBI is doing, trying to connect liquidity across multiple exchange venues, right? We as stablecoin holders might not be yield generating organically, but we can convert to a yield generating product like the tokenized money market fund, put that as collateral in, say, you know, AsianX or something, and get that as collateral for trading on the platform. So that's something that we're working towards to showcase in the next step of the project. Yeah.
As I mentioned, I mean, this year basically we introduced blockchain bridges in a lot of projects, and including ours, right? So one of the key features that we want to be able to exploit advantages across different types of blockchain, and that's the ultimate purpose in order to improve efficiency. Now, in our case for Arbitrum, it's basically speed and cost, and that's the reason why we chose Arbitrum, right? Now, for the panelists, do you see this to be the future for all projects? And if there are hurdles both operationally and regulatorily to consider in order to take such a solution into mass production? I think that's the ultimate question, right? We do POCs, but what's the next step, right? It's just production. Yeah. So maybe for this case, sorry, maybe let's have Collin to start the volley. Yeah.
So I think on the regulatory front, there is definitely some glaring issues. The first one is that, you know, for tokenized security products, different jurisdictions have different recognitions of what they define as capital markets or security. So moving collateral assets from one venue to the other, it's something that's going to be challenging, right? Say if you want to move from a exchange venue in Singapore to an exchange venue in the UK, although technologically we can solve that problem, but legally there will be some challenges in terms of moving assets cross-border. So I think that's one thing that's of an issue. The other one I think would be in terms of adoption, right? I think at the end of the day we can build like the best product, but you know, adoption is going to be key. I think earlier we heard from panelists talking about people getting interested in this space, but in terms of learning about the utility of why a tokenized product is going to be beneficial commercially for them is something that we still need to educate people on. One thing that they've solved quite well by building on Arbitrum, the fund process, is by driving down the cost for redemptions and subscriptions. So today, in terms of subscribing or issuing a new token, it's going to be very cheap on blockchain like Arbitrum. And taking it one step further, if you guys do secondary trading on the markets today, we go through a process of sometimes having to redeem and then reissue in order to do secondary trading. But now with a tokenized asset like this, you technically don't have to go through that whole process. You can just exchange the tokenized assets without going through that whole redemption and reissuance process. So that hopes to drive down costs. I think there was some study done that this whole process, when it's all tokenized on chain, it reduces cost by about 30 to 40 basis points. So that's significant savings for people who are trading actively in this space.
Yeah, that's very interesting because ultimately in our discussion when we are actually working on a project, so that's coming from the perspective of a distributor, right? One of the proposition was, at least the first question that some of the team members actually ask is, hey, UBS, can you accept stable coins? Therefore, we can actually send the funds to you directly instead of changing to fiat. Now, to be fair, I mean, the whole industry is moving, but it's taking baby steps. So unfortunately, UBS can't take the stable coins directly, has the payments, but definitely these are something that the whole industry is actually looking at. Why? Because with the provision of stable coins, or maybe things as close to funds, money, right? Monetary money on the chain, you can use it as the payments. And therefore, we can really realize this whole thing about atomic settlement, right? And then this probably will be interesting for Sergey to actually talk about it, right? I mean, how do you think CCIP can actually do that, right? To provision all these things, to make all these, that's the glue to make all these things work.
So to answer your earlier question and this question, I think what's really interesting here is the architecture of how this was built. Basically, you had one blockchain where you put the digital transfer agency smart contract, and you folks chose that blockchain because of various technical and cost considerations, right? So you decided to build a part of this whole thing in one chain, and then another part of it, the actual tokenized fund that's using the digital transfer agency, is on another chain, right? So what you basically have here is a single offering that is split across two chains, the transfer agency on one chain, the tokenized fund itself on another chain. And the reason you can do that is because you can connect them, right? So you can create a seamless, secure, reliable connection that's very cheap and easy to implement. And so now you can use two chains to make an application. This is kind of how the internet works, right? Like in the internet, you might have some services and some servers running in one cloud, like the Amazon cloud, and then you might have another set of servers and services running in the Google cloud. And then you combine those servers and services into an application, right? And nobody really knows that much about what cloud the application uses. Like you don't know what clouds Netflix uses or Uber or these applications, right? So what's really interesting is the architecture where you're using two chains and you're combining them into a single application. That's very interesting. The other thing that's interesting is the fact that the liquidity is somewhere else, right? So the liquidity is on many other chains. So firstly, connectivity helps you create an application at all because you can merge multiple chains into a single application that would have usually existed on one chain, but now it exists across chains, right? It functions that it uses this chain for that and that chain for something else, but it's one offering as a final offering to the user, right? And then you have the liquidity somewhere else. You have it in other chains, and then the question is, how do you get that liquidity to connect with the offering on one of the chains, right? So I think to your first question, I think the architecture here is what people are going to be doing, because you're going to use different chains for different parts of your application, just like you use different clouds for different parts of your web application. And then you're going to interconnect all those different chains. And so an application could end up running on 5 chains or 10 chains. And then if your user base is across 1,000 chains, now you've got 1,000 places that need to connect into your application in order for it to have liquidity and a user base in order for it to be successful. So this is the value of connectivity. It's both the ability to build an application that operates on many chains at the same time, just for it to operate, and then the ability to connect with the user base that has liquidity in other places. And so your digital transfer agency smart contract on Arbitrum should be able to be reused for many chains. by many tokenized funds, not just from Ethereum, right? So this is the architecture that I think does make sense, and why we're building all this connectivity, both between chains to make a single application, and then between chains to feed value into that application. So that's my general view.
One of the key highlights, I mean, of what we are trying to do as well, I mean, and this is in line with what SBI Digital Markets wants to do, is to also be able to bring assets across different jurisdiction, right? However, that is what we plan to do. Of course, I mean, thinking out loud, right? I mean, across jurisdiction, which also reflected in the paper as well. I mean, you are going to cross the different laws and regulations of different countries, right? And right now, one of the key things is digital assets is like the laws around digital assets not normalized across different countries, right? And therefore, moving assets is still going to be a huge challenge for us. But I mean, with the white paper, I mean, if there's no consideration of how we can normalize that, there's a very high chance, you know, STOs itself can move across jurisdiction, just like a crypto assets that exist today. And with all these facilities right now, we have payments, you know, we have bridges. Literally, we can really effectively get this vision of bringing true assets across around the globe, around different exchanges, around different buy sides, right, from the sell sides. So I have one final question, okay? So going to 2025, what new activities are being planned? I mean, it can be for this project or even for your company itself when it relates to, you know, asset and distribution management, right? So maybe we have like Sergey to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I see many more tokenized funds coming up, and I see the need for lots of data to go into those tokenized funds, to go into the digital transfer agency contracts, to go into that whole flow. And so I see Chainlink providing a lot of that data through what we call smart data, and that's many different categories of data that are basically used for asset servicing. So I see a large emergence of various asset servicing data sets from Chainlink to enable all kinds of tokenized financial products, tokenized funds, all kinds of financial products that can't function without the data. Then I see a lot of cross-chain connectivity being enabled by Chainlink, both across chains to make an application function and across chains to get liquidity into the application to become basically a technical way to get access to more users across more chains. And then we also have something called the Chainlink runtime environment, the CRE, where you can actually coordinate all of this complexity between the data sources and the chains using a single piece of code. And the CRE can run existing languages like Go and TypeScript now, and we're considering other languages like Rust and others. And I think that should take the time that it takes to build something like this down from months down to days, right? That's the goal of the CRE, and that's an exciting development that we announced recently at our conference. But I think those are the three big things that are going to relate very heavily to the fund tokenization industry: the data, the connectivity, and then a computing environment where you can compose those more advanced financial products very easily using existing languages so that they work across chains and across data sources.
Maybe I think that's the end of the session. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, panelists. Thank you, Sergey. And thank you,
so
Collin.
much. Thank you.
Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you. My pleasure.